Mark jolted awake to the thunderous boom of an explosion, his heart pounding against his chest like a trapped animal. Outside his window, the night sky blazed an unnatural orange, the air heavy with the stench of burning wood and gasoline. He stumbled out of bed, his bare feet slipping on the chilly hardwood floor. Yanking the curtains aside, his stomach dropped. His boats, his treasured lifelines, the ones he'd used to save countless souls, were swallowed by flames. The fire roared and hissed, a living thing, greedily devouring the dock and inching closer to his house. For a split second, he stood paralyzed, his mind racing to catch up with the surreal scene. The Coast Guard had drilled him for emergencies, fires, floods, disasters, but never in his own backyard. He bolted downstairs, snagging the fire extinguisher by the door before charging outside. The heat hit him like a wall, smoke clawing at his lungs. Water. He needed water. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but he knew it was too late. The boats were beyond saving. Neighbors spilled from their homes, drawn by the chaos, some filming with their phones, others yelling questions he barely heard. His attention snapped to a flicker of movement in the shadows, a small, tense figure slinking away through the trees along the neighborhood's edge. A figure that felt eerily familiar. Linda. The realization slammed into him like a freight train. Linda Grayson, the self-proclaimed ruler of the HOA community, the woman who'd loathed his boats with a venom so intense it had now, quite literally, set his world on fire. 2 weeks earlier, Mark had settled into the scenic HOA neighborhood, craving peace after 5 grueling years with the Coast Guard, battling hurricanes, rescuing stranded boaters, and pulling ships from the brink. He'd dreamed of a quiet spot to moor his boats and unwind when he wasn't on duty. Instead, he'd stepped into Linda Grayson's warpath. It began with notes, crisp, passive-aggressive letters tucked into his mailbox. "Your boats violate community standards," one declared. Another claimed they degrade property values. He'd scoured the HOA handbook. It micromanaged fence heights, lawn lengths, even door colors, but said nothing about boats on private docks. Then came the visit. Linda, a woman in her late 50s with a rigid gray bob and an aura of smug superiority, appeared at his doorstep, clipboard in hand, her smile as fake as her pleasantries. "We need to discuss your boats," she said, peering past him toward the dock with unveiled disdain. Mark leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "Pretty sure we don't." Her tone sharpened. "Oh, we do. This neighborhood thrives on uniformity, Mr. Carter. Those boats are an eyesore." "They're in my yard," he countered. "But visible from the water," she shot back, her polite mask slipping. "They disrupt our harmony. They need to go now." Mark didn't flinch. No, her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. They're not breaking rules, and I use them to save lives." "So no." Linda's lips tightened into a thin slash. "We'll see about that." The next day, fake fines arrived, one for unapproved dock alterations, another for noise disturbances when he hadn't even been home. Then came a letter threatening lawsuits. Mark laughed it off. Linda clearly thought he was some pushover she could intimidate. She didn't know 2 things. First, he'd spent years untangling government red tape and could spot a bluff a mile away. Second, he didn't back down from fights. Her campaign escalated. Linda rallied HOA members, trying to turn them against him. A few joined her, but most stayed neutral, tired of her bullying but too scared to resist. She'd ruled the HOA like a tyrant for years, and compliance was easier than rebellion. One night, Mark came home to a sign stabbed into his lawn. "Remove your boats or face consequences. HOA rules must be obeyed." It wasn't official, just a threat. He yanked it out, sighing. He'd faced hurricanes. Linda was just a loud breeze. But he hadn't expected her to go this far. Now, standing in his yard, watching his boat smolder into the water, he knew this wasn't about rules anymore. The fire chief approached, wiping soot from his brow. "Looks like arson," he said gravely. Mark's jaw clenched. He'd suspected it, but confirmation ignited a fury in his gut. His boats were gone. Linda thought she'd won. A slow, dangerous grin crept across his face. She had no clue who she'd crossed. The next morning, Mark sifted through the wreckage of his dock. The acrid smell of charred wood and melted fiberglass lingered, the boats reduced to blackened shells half sunk in the water. Firefighters packed up, their radios buzzing with final notes. Neighbors hovered, some genuinely worried, others smirking at the drama. The fire chief, a weathered man with calloused hands, sighed beside him. Flames spread too fast, too clean. Someone knew what they were doing. Mark exhaled hard, his teeth grinding. He'd seen Linda fleeing, her threats replaying in his mind. He knew it was her, but proving it was another story. The police took his statement, but their vague, "we'll look into it," frustrated him. They mentioned nearby security footage might help, but without a clear face, they couldn't act. Linda would squirm out of it. HOA queens like her thrived on dodging accountability. Not this time. Mark spent the day collecting evidence. His cameras caught the figure's shape, not her face. But the Petersons, 2 houses down, had a doorbell cam that nabbed a partial view. A woman with Linda's telltale gray bob, lugging what looked like a gas can. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Linda, though, was a master manipulator. When Mark confronted her, she clutched her chest, feigning shock. "Arson? Me? How dare you?" He stared her down. "You've threatened me since day one. Fake fines, signs, and now my boats burn." Her expression turned sly. "Oh, Mark, are you that paranoid? Maybe you torched them yourself, insurance scam, right? Those boats must have cost a fortune to maintain." His fists balled. "Excuse me. Don't act surprised," she cooed, her eyes glinting. "No proof it was me, just a blurry video. Could be anyone. Vandalism's been rampant lately." She was good, twisting, deflecting, sowing doubt. He could see the HOA waver. No one wanted her wrath. That was fine. He didn't need their help, just justice. Mark played it cool, letting Linda think she'd won. She strutted around, hosting safety meetings, hinting at dangerous residents. She aimed to isolate him, force him out. She didn't know he'd already moved his pieces. First, he filed a federal complaint. His boats were Coast Guard assets, making their destruction more than vandalism. It was a federal offense. Linda was in deep now. Then, he quietly rebuilt his dock, letting her believe he'd given up. One day, a gleaming yacht arrived, parked where his old boats once stood. Linda exploded. She stormed over, clipboard flapping, face crimson. "This is outrageous. You can't have a yacht. It's a violation." Mark sipped his coffee, unfazed. "Check the rules. You hated unsightly boats. This beauty's worth millions, no eyesore here." She sputtered. "You're attacking our community. Your control, you mean," he corrected. "No one else cares." Her hands trembled. "I won't let you mock the HOA." He smirked. "What'll you do, burn this too?" She flinched, subtle, but there. Neighbors watched, phones out, recording. Mark leaned in, voice low. "You should have been smarter, Linda. You thought you'd win because you ruled this place. Wrong guy." Her mask shattered as sirens approached. Police stepped out, eyeing the scene. "Linda Grayson," an officer said, flipping a notebook. "We're investigating arson on this property." She laughed nervously. "That's absurd. I'm innocent." "We've got footage, complaints, and your little rant just now," he said, nodding at the crowd. "Plus an arrest warrant." Her face paled. "This is a setup." The officer didn't blink. "Turn around, hands behind your back," she shrieked, lunging at him, but was quickly cuffed. "I'm the HOA president. I have rights." Mark chuckled. "Not anymore." As Linda was hauled away, pleading, the neighborhood exhaled. Applause broke out, tentative, then loud. An older man, Bill, approached Mark, hand outstretched. "Been here 20 years. Been waiting for someone to topple her." Mark grinned, shaking it. Glad to oblige. Others followed, some apologizing for their silence. Others relieved her reign was done. The next HOA meeting was electric. No Linda at the helm. They voted her out unanimously and elected Bill, who vowed to dismantle her petty rules. Turns out, Mark's Coast Guard ties qualified the area for maritime tax breaks, lower fees for all. Poetic justice. Linda's obsession with erasing his boats backfired, benefiting everyone. Days later, a moving truck rolled up to Linda's house. Legal fees forced her to sell. No one cared where she went. Mark watched from his porch, salt air in his lungs, smiling. He'd rebuild his dock, replace what was lost. This time, no one would dare stop him.